Okay, perfect. I think we'll get started now anyway. So yeah, this evening we've got an exciting webinar ahead. We've got Ben Cartwright from Football Fitness Federation and Chris Barnes. So what I'll do is I'll let Ben sort of introduce the session and introduce Chris and talk about what we're going to discuss over the next hour. Just a bit of housekeeping from myself. We've got the Q&A at the end of the session. There's a Q&A box. So just to be clear, there's a chat box and a Q&A box. So for questions that you have that you want to ask Chris, then just pop them in there and just keep popping them in throughout the whole session and we'll get around to them at the end. If you put them in the chat, we may miss them. So put them into the Q&A. And then just a small thing from Physique, we've got a few webinars coming up over the next few weeks, just because we know it's pretty challenging for a lot of people. So we've got about one a week. So just keep your eyes peeled for that. And then, of course, you can look over at Football Fitness stuff. There's loads of episodes. I think there's 100 episodes or something that have just come out. So plenty of content to get your teeth stuck into. But we'll go straight into it with Ben. So if you just want to give a bit of an overview for everybody of what we're going to discuss over the next hour.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks to Charlie and Physique, but also big thank you to Chris for giving up his time. I'm sure many people know about Chris and his CV, a unbelievably impressive CV, and I'm just going to sort of briefly skim over some of the stuff that Chris has done because he's a pioneer in sports science, without doubt, someone that's been in the industry for over 20 years, extremely experienced practitioner. Back in '96, I think it was, Chris, a sports scientist at Middlesbrough. And anyone that remembers that team will be able to think of some of the outstanding talents they had in that team at that time. Also set up his own company, CB Performance Limited, in 2009, and then went on to work with a number of different football clubs, Newcastle, West Brom, QPR, Bromby as well, which I know we might touch on a little bit in the webinar too. And then also has had advisory roles with a number of different companies, Nike or Nike, as some people say, Red Bull, Catapult Sports, also working with UEFA, which again, I think we're going to talk about in the webinar, and the Confederation of African Football as well, which is, we've just been speaking about it before we click live then, and some really exciting work going on. So just first of all, I just want to say a big thank you to Chris for coming on. We're going to talk about a range of different topics. We put it out there and we've said that we're going to basically split it into 3 parts. The first part is going to be about the introduction of physical performance strategies in football. We're then going to go on to talking about support for coach education. And we're going to talk about some opportunities that you can sort of seek out as well. And then the final part, just to refer to what Charlie said then, we're going to go through a Q&A. So if you have got questions, if you think of things along the way, post them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end. But yeah, Chris, thank you very much for coming on, mate. I don't know if you want to add anything to that intro or you're happy to dive straight in.
No, it's basically all the intro means is that obviously I'm quite a bit older than you guys and probably older than most people who are listening to this, and possibly was working in football before most people who are listening to this were even born.
No, we've got to learn from your experiences, though, and this is what this webinar is all about. So we'll kick it off, mate. We'll jump into the first section. Talk us through, because obviously, if we talk about your role at Middlesbrough, we're talking back in '96. So sports science would have been quite new back then. And like I said, you're a pioneer in sports science, one of the early sports scientists in football. So just talk to us about some of the early experiences that you went through within football.
Yeah, I mean, when I went in at Middlesbrough, I was a member of staff at Teesside University, the local university. And my introduction to football was as random as it can get, really. So it resulted from a telephone call with a cardiologist who I'd done a little bit of research with. And he happened to be a member of the medical advisory board at Middlesbrough. And the chairman had, at the time, they had a pretty high-profile player with them, Fabrizio Ravanelli. Ravanelli was there for 1 season. He scored 30-something goals. The club got to 2 cup finals, and he got relegated. And so Rav wasn't going to hang around. He was going to leave. But to be fair to him, And to be fair to the chairman, he showed sufficient respect to the chairman to say, look, I need to advise you on a couple of things, if you don't mind. And one of them was in relation to the then training facilities. And the other one was in relation to, look, you need to take science and medicine more seriously. Now, to cut a long story short, the chairman, Gibbo, went to the medical board and said, you guys are going to produce this strategy. And they were fine with medicine, but science in football was totally alien at the time. So Adrian said, well, look, I know a guy who I'll give a call to. And he did. And one thing led to another. And a few months later, I was on board with the club. And I was armed with my exercise physiology knowledge, which at the time, most of the exercise physiology knowledge was built around endurance sports, unfortunately. So one of the first things I did there was I put a lab in the training ground, because we had a blank sheet of paper for this training ground. And at the time, other clubs hadn't built training grounds. So we didn't have a template or a book or a scheme to follow. So that was the first thing we did. And we had this fantastic facility to measure and monitor essentially the physiology of the players. So we were taking bloods and we were looking at CK levels 1 day and 2 days post-game. And we had a metabolic cart there. We were running VO2 max tests. And everything I'm talking to you about here kind of sums up what we were doing in those first 10 years, because probably 9 out of 10 decisions that I made where I thought I was actually driving things forward in football, probably I could have made better. There were mistakes. We learned so much by what we did, but I don't think we particularly advanced knowledge or pushed things forward. It was an incredible 10 years or 12 years that I had at Middlesbrough. And as I say, I think, don't get me wrong, a lot of the things that we did do, I'm really, really proud of. I'm proud of the people that we brought through, and there's a lot of them are occupying high-profile positions globally at the moment. I think I worked with some sensational practitioners, and at the time they were 22, 23, 24-year-olds. And I think we learned an awful lot. We did learn an awful lot about football, and we learned about, as technologies evolved and developed, how to get good value from the information they produce. But because we were trying things that possibly hadn't been tried in that context before, geez, we learned an awful lot of things that don't work, and we made so many mistakes. The good thing is, because people hadn't done it before, nobody knew that we were making those mistakes. So a lot of them went unnoticed at the time. But they say about learning from your mistakes, and yeah, I've learned an awful lot. What I would say, though, is, as I sit here today, 20 odd years on, the volume of knowledge in relation to football performance and sports science and all the rest of it has grown way beyond any one person, and certainly my capacity to absorb it. So actually today I know less than I did in 1996 in relative terms.
That's the old bell curve, isn't it, that we all go through in our careers. Yeah. But Chris, just on that, because in a second, I think it'd be great to touch on some of the stuff you're doing currently, because I think that ties in really nicely on the sort of on your career. But just to go back on some of those mistakes, if you could flip things around, what would be your approach? How would your approach change in terms of some of the strategies you maybe employ if you could go back to those times at Middlesbrough now?
What a great question. I've never been asked this one before in that context. So the first thing I would say is, I'd reiterate what I just said earlier. I think I probably learned more from the mistakes I've made than I have from the positive and the better decisions that I've made at that time. So it would be easy to say, okay, I shouldn't have spent the money, Steve Gibson's money, on the creation and development of quite a sophisticated laboratory. As an aside, one thing we did was the roof was too low. So we had a player, Gary Pallister, at the club at the time. And when we ramped the treadmill up, his head hit the roof. We had to have the roof raised by 8 inches in the laboratory. But in all seriousness, what I probably would do would certainly be to spend a lot more time understanding more about the professional game more quickly. So I played a lot of football myself, and I played to a reasonable standard. And you think you know the game, but the professional game and the culture of the professional game is totally different to what we think we know in our own little bubble, in our own little world. And one thing, probably the biggest lesson that I've learned over the years is, if we want our interventions to be successful, we have to approach them from a retro engineering perspective. And far, far too often, we come into an environment, it's not necessarily football, it could be any environment, and we've got our bag of tricks. And we've got the knowledge that we've gained because we've been to university or wherever, and we've attended modules that have been taught by high-profile academics. And we spent a little bit of time in a lab or on the field collecting data and information. And so we want to tell everybody how clever we are. Mm. When the reality is, most of what we've acquired while we're in university doesn't align with the challenges that we face in these environments. So the first thing is just be patient, spend time, and actually understand the environment and understand the immediate challenges that you're trying to implement in that place. Because, you know, as you outlined at the outset, you know, I've been so fortunate to work with a whole host of different clubs, to work in a load of different countries and different environments. You've got to know your entry point, and your entry point can only be determined by truly understanding what makes that culture tick and what makes it not tick, and where you can actually have some kind of an impact.
And that leads perfectly onto what you've just been telling us about before we started recording. Again, the work you're doing over in Nigeria. So do you want to just give a little bit of sort of background around that, and then the approach also that you've taken over there?
Yeah, so this is your classic case of deja vu in a sense. So football club that I am doing some work with in Nigeria is a club called Vandretsa FC. As you mentioned in the introduction, I do a little bit of consultancy work for Catapult Sports, and Catapult have sold a set of GPS devices to Vandretsa. But one of the things that the guy who operates the African function, Kieran Dannett, is acutely aware that you can't just drop technology in Africa. You have to give backup and support to actually help the organization that you're working with to truly embrace it and to understand the information that they're creating. So this football club, anyway, has an owner and a president who also owns a huge energy company, Vandretsa Energy. He lives in London, and he's a football fanatic, and he's visited a number of clubs, and he goes to games whenever he can in the UK. And so he's seen football in the UK, and he wants to try and replicate it in Nigeria. The problem is, Nigeria is not even at first base when it comes to football. In its broadest sense, there are a lot of very talented players that have come from Nigeria, you know, and as we were all well aware, you know, recently and in years gone by. But it's no surprise, because it's a country of 200 million people, and it's football daft. So the president's vision is to create this incubation hub where we have a young team and we optimize what we can get from them. Technically, tactically, football brain, but also physically, in order that these guys are fit for practice. And then we showcase these people, and hopefully they get their big opportunity in other places. So the introduction was made. I had a few chats with the chairman, and I'm now on board to try and implement this physical performance strategy for Vandretsa Football Club. And exactly what I've said before applies here. The big challenge last year, of course, was the COVID situation. So in order to truly understand the culture and truly understand the challenges, you need to be on site. And there was about 4 months passed between us agreeing that, yeah, we wanted to work together, and me actually setting foot on site in Nigeria in early December last year. And so, yeah, I don't know if you want me to go on and talk through the experience. I'm more than happy to. I flew into Nigeria first week in December last year, and the first thing that it shouldn't have surprised me, but the first thing that I began to understand was just what a different place this is to an awful lot of other countries I've visited. And I've visited Libya and Iran and Saudi Arabia, China, in India. This is different. The club COO met me exiting the airport, having taken 1 3/4 hours to get through immigration. And he was accompanied by a guy who would become my best friend for the 8 days I was there. And this was a guy who was ex-Nigerian Special Services, and he was carrying a Kalashnikov rifle. And so that was the first eye-opener for me. And then the following day, we went on site, and I met the other key people in the club and the players. So the players are based in a players' camp over there. There are 3 huge buildings inside this walled compound, and it's a walled compound that has its own armed guard. These are professional footballers, but your vision of a professional footballer in the UK bears no semblance to what I was seeing there. So these guys occupy 2 of these buildings. They live 4 to a room. They're on site for 6 days a week. They exit the site 1 day a week, although the club is very, very COVID conscious and is very alert to the situation. They live 4 to a room, and they sleep in 2 bunk beds in this room. So I've gone into this place. There is a coach, Brazilian coach, and his assistant. And these guys are fantastic, really, really open and warm and welcoming. And immediately you get the impression, yeah, I'm going to like this place. But what happens? And then you see the place that they train. You see the fact that it's taken them 45 minutes on a bus to get from the player camp to the training ground and then back again. There is precious little information, zero information collected on the players. And so the point of entry wasn't just taking the clock back 25 years to Middlesbrough, but actually it was going back again because we really were introducing fundamental monitoring. So let's just start by monitoring which days players train, which days they have rest. Let's just start by looking at things like body mass. Very quickly, we've introduced hydration testing, pee samples with the players, and I've got Chris Curtis, a nutritionist on board. Chris works with Crystal Palace and QPR and England Rugby. And so while I was there, I had Chris zooming in with introductory educational webinars for the players that are out there. And the great thing is, the players are so humble. They truly are. So they know and they can see that what we're trying to do is something that is in their best interests. And what we're trying to do is to provide a support framework in order that they can maybe become the best player that they are and then be showcased and hopefully make a career in places where they can earn a really good living from football. So they're humble, and they're also so positive about the situation that they're finding themselves in. But from my perspective, that week there was, I've had a lot of eye-openers and a lot of sort of cultural education, football culture education in my time. But it was just absolutely vital in order that hopefully we've found the right entry point on this project. And what it also did was it's ignited a real passion in me to want, I truly do want to be a part of this project going forward. And I truly do want to engage with it and see if we can just make a small difference. This is not just about Vandretta FC, and this is I'm speaking now, this is the voice of the president. He wants to impact on football in Nigeria in its global sense. But just going back very quickly, and then I'll shut up. So you've got the two coaches there, and then you've got a chief operating officer, you've got a club secretary, we've got an academy manager. The academy opened on 7th of January this year. There's no physiotherapist, there's no fitness coach. There is an analyst there, but he doubles up as the media guy. So I now am in negotiation with them about the best way forward to ensure that these guys have the best possible care on an ongoing basis. So, some people watching this may be aware we're in the process of trying to recruit a fitness coach, and that will be followed up by trying to recruit a physiotherapist. And this will be full-time, based in Lagos in Nigeria. But it'll be part of something that it's going to be a fantastic project and a fantastic journey.
And that's why we wanted you to touch on that, because I think it opens up people's minds to the opportunities that are out there. And I'm sure we might get a few questions on these. And guys, if you have got any questions, just post them in the Q&A, because we're going to tackle a few subjects, but I know Chris is open to any questions that you guys have got. So just make sure you post them at the bottom. But Chris as well, because we're talking about a full scale in your career, aren't we? From working with the football club over in Nigeria to obviously starting out at Middlesbrough to working up to the Premier League with clubs like Newcastle. So what are some things that stand out for you in terms of sports science and sports science support that have evolved the most over that time?
So when I started in 1996, I think anybody who's listening who is a practitioner in a professional football club today will be horrified to hear that there weren't actually GPS devices to track guys in training. And to some extent, I'm responsible for the introduction of this. Not totally, but at Middlesbrough, we did take charge of the first only five GPS devices to arrive in the UK into a football club. Obviously, nowadays, it seems like, and it's true, there seems to be an absolute obsession with monitoring and load monitoring, if you like. But I still struggle when I see an awful lot of different practices and approaches, because as well as the clubs I've worked at, I've mentored younger staff in a number of Premier League clubs. And they show me their sort of load monitoring, recording, reporting systems. And I often wonder, two things really. First of all, does anybody actually look at this? Because it's a spreadsheet competition. How many numbers can we get on a sheet of paper? And does it truly reflect or represent what's happened? And does the coach give a shit about what you're actually showing them? Because ultimately, what you're showing the coach should impact on his or her decisions. And then the second thing is, I'm obviously a lot older than most practitioners in professional football. And I had careers beforehand. I was trained as a scientist, as a metallurgist in the steelworks. And that fundamental scientific training has stayed with me. And so in amongst all of this, and it's fantastic that we do have this technology available and we're creating all of this information. But so many clubs are missing out on the fundamentals. Like, at the end of the day, they'll use their £80,000 worth of technology. They'll put it on each of the players. They'll collect information. They'll process the information and they'll create the spreadsheet. And then they'll go into the coach and the coach will say, so what does that mean? And they'll say, oh, training was hard today, coach. Or they'll have some subjective interpretation of the information that they're seeing. And we've got to be better than that. There's this whole, everybody will be aware of this idea of signal and noise. Football is the noisiest game in the world, and there's so much variance in the information we collect. So the job of the people who are collecting this information is to quantify that noise. So when they see something that's outside of that natural and normal variation, that's when we can go in and we can say to the coach, before he says, tell me about this, I want to tell you about player X. Today, yesterday, the day before, for whatever reason, their training numbers were way down on what we might have expected. Okay, let's go and have a conversation with that player. Or coach, in the last few weeks, the whole training intensity for the squad has dropped below what we'd expect. Okay, that's something for the coach to act on. Why is that the case? Rather than a subjective interpretation from the scientist's point of view. Of course, to have that conversation, and this is the difficult thing for so many people coming into the sport, you've got to have the trust and the respect of the coach. And it's easier when, like me, you've got no hair or grey hair, or you've been around the block a few times. You do tend to get a little bit more time, but you've got to get the trust and the respect of the coach in order that they'll give you that 30 seconds. And the most difficult thing is you've also got to know when there's nothing to say. So yes, you're using all of this technology, using all of this equipment that the club have invested in, but that doesn't mean every day you've got to go and try and pester the coach who's got media people and his other coaches and the players pestering him. Only pester the coach when you've actually got a message to give that is important. And even then, he might not use it because he's got 5 other messages and he'll decide which are the most important ones. And so many times what happens then is, and I'm going a little bit off track here, so you'll have to excuse me, but so many times what happens is the immediate response of the coach is to tell you where to go. So you go, but you need to have the confidence that, yes, he'll tell you where to go, but coaches are intelligent people. They don't get those jobs not being bright, intelligent people. And they'll retain that conversation and they'll reflect on it later. And don't be surprised if tomorrow what you've told them and what you've suggested is actually actioned.
And just,
of course, it's not. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say on that, in terms of, because we called the webinar obviously the past, present, and future of sports science. So I was going to look into the future a little bit. So taking that into account, so obviously the data and the tech that's available now, we've got so much information that we can gather. Would you say that going forward over the next few years, we might actually start to look at less because we're getting a bit more specific on what we want at different clubs and why we want it?
Yeah, and that's going to be the real challenge. So of course, over the years, we have taken on more and more technology, and I know you'll have had people on the webinar that have spoken about a whole variety of different pieces of equipment that will give you insight into individuals. And the problem then is you have this huge amount of information. And to be fair, there aren't many companies that have the capacity and possibly don't want the capacity to distill that down into some simplistic messages, or distill it down to say, actually, there's no message, because then, what's the point in having the technology? Some people might say. I'd like to think in the future, though, that we ourselves, if the companies don't develop the capacity to do that, that we ourselves will develop our analytical skills. If there are any students listening in on this call here, and you're a student sports scientist and you're looking to work in professional sport, there's a dearth of practitioners, and I'm one of them, by the way, and there's many other, not too much younger than me, who are not particularly great at data analytics. So things like using programs like R and MATLAB, Alteryx and the like, to make this analysis fast and make it something that distills this information down into simplistic messages. These are the skills that increasingly people are crying out for. We all must have seen that message a few days ago where they were saying Man City have employed a guy who's got a PhD in astrophysics as part of their data science team. This is fantastic, and it's brilliant, as long as the work that he does is capable of shrinking the message and not just increasing the amount of data and information that we have. We can't just create confusion to show how clever we are. The real skill is distilling that down into something that is, and this is no disrespect to players or coaches, but you've got to start a conversation somewhere. So let's start that conversation with a simplistic message and then build it out and take it on. If you don't start at a point that everyone's comfortable with, the conversation will terminate and it won't come back.
Yeah, brilliant. Now we'll move it on, Chris, because I'm just wary of the time. It's absolutely flying by. We wanted to go into some support for coach education. I know you're doing some amazing work with UEFA at the moment, so I think it'd be great to touch on that. But we'll reiterate as well when we get through this section, guys. We'll go into some Q&A. So if you've got any questions or anything that Chris has talked about already, or any of the coach education or potential opportunities, fire them in the Q&A, and we'll get to those once we've gone through this section. So. Chris, you want to talk to us? Just give us a little rundown on the work you're doing with UEFA to start with.
Yeah, so UEFA it calls it the Fitness Advisory Group, and 7 people in the group from across Europe. And our role is, there's several aspects to the role itself. So one of them relates to what we call the coaching convention. So UEFA has just released a new coaching convention, and this is actually an umbrella that sits across all of the coaching awards that UEFA provides a framework for. So in England, for example, if you go to St. George's Park and you're doing your pro license, A license, you're doing your B license with your local FA or your C license, that is done under the framework of UEFA. So you've got the 4 awards there, and then there are 2 goalkeeping and 2 elite youth awards. And one of the roles that we have had is to rewrite and bring up to date the fitness component of that. So over the next few months now, we're running a series of webinars where all of the individual nations are invited, and we will run an interactive workshop to explain just how this framework will integrate into the coaching side of things. Because one of the things that we're conscious of is historically, a lot of coaches have viewed fitness as something that is for the fitness coaches, or something that's complicated, or something we don't want to engage with. And the big challenge we've got is to try and make that link and integrate the fitness side of things with the coaching that's going on. So that's one thing we do. Second thing that, for the last 3 years, I've been involved in these things they call share workshops. And these are brilliant, where there'll be 4 or 5 of these a year, which will take place in one location. One of the associations will host it. And we'll bring in 7 or 8 other nations. And it might be the technical director, the head of coach education, the head of fitness. It could be we've had managers there, national managers. And we get them all in the same room. And we attack certain topics and questions as a group. And each of the nations shares what they've got. And, the great thing about this is you'll have nations which you might class as more mature, like England, France, Belgium, Sweden. And then, of course, across Europe, you've got other nations that just don't have the same resource. You could have Andorra or Armenia or Malta, and nations like that. And with no disrespect to them, they just don't have the same resource to call upon. So this is a real opportunity for them to get together and actually understand how they can fulfill their own missions using information that they'll gather from other associations.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. And also the changes in coach education, Chris, as well, because obviously there's been different pathways in terms of where sports scientists can sort of go and study. So where do you see that going in the future?
So one of the really exciting initiatives that is going to happen very soon, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, I don't know if UEFA have it, it's public knowledge.
We won't tell them.
So older people will remember that there used to be an FA fitness certificate that they ran, and that has disappeared. But UEFA, in the same way that you've got these 4 core coaching diplomas, and then you've got goalkeeper level B and level A, and you've got elite youth at B and A. We're going to be creating very soon a fitness diploma at B and A level. And because it's coming under the umbrella of UEFA, it will carry quite a bit of weight, and it'll take time. but hopefully it will permeate through football as a whole. And we'll find ourselves in a situation where people will actually begin to ask for this universal qualification. So if somebody is employing a fitness coach, let's say in Spain, and they're interviewing people from Belgium and Poland and Hungary, if these people don't possess this UEFA diploma, then they probably won't make the cut. And I think in time, this will become the benchmark, the starting point for applications for sports science and fitness coaching roles across Europe. Now, I know at the moment we have a situation, it's a difficult situation where there's no regulation in the Premier League at the senior level as to who takes on a fitness coach job. And we all know that there's been situations where people's brothers and cousins and good friends have taken on that role with no qualifications whatsoever. The EPPP has been fantastic in terms of our own home academy structure, and that's placed all sorts of requirements on academies at the various levels. But one day we can only hope that similar things are imposed at the Premier League senior level, in the same way that the head coach, of course, has to possess a pro license. Why shouldn't it be the same that the person that's in charge of the physical condition of players, and let's be honest, that's a dangerous job, they should actually have some kind of accreditation that they carry with them.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people have been crying out for, isn't it? I've seen a lot of discussions around that. One thing we spoke about, Chris, when we initially spoke about this webinar was that the opportunities that are out there sort of around the world. And possibly one thing I was going to ask is where people need to go to seek out these opportunities. Because I think we spoke when we were on the phone about coaches going out to different countries that probably a few years ago we wouldn't have been looking at. We'd have been looking maybe into Europe, some of the European leagues, but we wouldn't have been looking further afield. And you've spoke about the work you're doing over in Nigeria and Africa. So when coaches are looking to expand their knowledge and their careers, what would your advice be on sort of reaching out to these areas and keeping an eye for these opportunities?
I think you've kind of answered your own question at one level there, Ben. But as I mentioned earlier, I've been so fortunate in that I've had the opportunity to deliver workshops and events in a whole variety of places, and so it's amazing to me when I go to, let's say, Shanghai, and I'm delivering a workshop for the Chinese football community, like the fitness community. And there's a couple of guys in the audience there who are English guys. One of them, funnily enough, was an intern that I had when I was working at Middlesbrough. I'd lost touch with him, and he rocked up at this. A similar thing happened in India. And these opportunities are arising all the time in places like this, and everybody's aware that the Chinese situation is a fluid one. It's a difficult one. Culturally, it's very, very different, obviously, to the UK. But my advice to young practitioners that don't have the ties to the UK and possibly are a little bit adventurous, because you have to embrace the place that you go to. There are opportunities in China. There are opportunities in India. There are opportunities in Russia and places like that, and also in Eastern Europe. But you've got to be realistic, and you've got to go over there with your eyes open. In the same way that, and I think we're all aware now that even in the UK, if you're working at a League One or League Two club, or you're working in the academy of a championship club, you're not going to be driving a BMW 5 Series. Football, unfortunately, at this point in time, is full of inequalities, and the money in football isn't the same if you're working in sports science at those levels as it is if you're working as a lead in the Premier League. But you need to get experience. And the experience abroad won't necessarily pay you a huge amount, but the opportunity very often to build a culture yourself, to integrate with the culture that exists over there, and to actually contribute towards the development of a football club. And actually, let's be honest, to contribute to the development of a group of players within that club is something that surely you can't afford to avoid. So you've got to look wider nowadays. Football isn't just about the UK and Europe. Obviously, it's a huge growth sport in the US, but look the other way as well. Look to Eastern Europe, look to Russia. And okay, Africa is a late developer, a late adopter, if you like, in this domain. But the last 2 years, we've run workshops in Johannesburg where every one of the 54 African nations has sent 2 or 3 representatives. It is the most joyful workshop you could ever run. These people are fantastic, and they have such an appetite for knowledge, and they have such an appetite for development. They're representing their nations. These will be possibly a fitness coach with a club in the nation, or they could be working with a national team. But they know that they've got an awful lot to learn. They know that the world has left them behind a little bit, and they have such an appetite to learn. And, if you could get a post or a position in an African nation, a colleague of mine, I was speaking only today, I had a call today, and he was asking me, he'd seen the post that I'd put out about this Nigerian club, and he was saying, look, I've got something going off in a different African nation, and I'm looking to put somebody in post. Once you've gone through your process, if you've got any CVs or anybody, can you push them my way? So there will be, and there are opportunities out there, but I think you've got to speculate, and you've got to go and do your homework. How many people know how many clubs, professional clubs there are in Vietnam? There's a lot more than you think.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And you can sort of see the buzz that you get speaking about this project. So I think there's more to it. We've talked about salary, and obviously we have to take that into consideration when taking jobs, don't we? Because we have to pay our bills essentially, but there's also the reason why we do what we do. And you can sort of see it when you speak about the work that you're doing currently. It's exciting because there's so much to build on, isn't there?
Oh, totally. Totally. And at the end of the day, everybody will use as their reference point, probably, the UK. If you wanted to work in football, the UK Premier League. And there's an awful lot of people earning an awful lot of good money as fitness coaches, sports scientists, heads of performance in the Premier League. But these people have cut the teeth in other jobs. They haven't just landed where they are. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, they haven't just progressed through the same club, because football is just so different, not just by continent, not just by country, but by club within the country. The culture at, and I'm going to pick 2 clubs that I know nothing about here, but the culture at Crystal Palace is totally different to the culture at Millwall. Mm-hmm. Just working at 2 different clubs like that, you have to get as much experience as you can. And I know these topics have been covered loads, and it's a throwaway topic for me and easy to say. You've got to get as much experience as you can. It's not easy, I know. But if you do get opportunities and you're in a position to grasp it, then grab the bull by the horns and have a go.
Brilliant. I think we'll move on to, sorry, Charlie, we're going to...
Yeah, just on that point, I think, because it kind of touches upon what you mentioned at the start about understanding the culture. So like you mentioned about professional sport, professional football, and you knew a lot about football, but there's so much you didn't know. And it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on people getting experience is great, but also how do they actually understand the culture of either a sport or if it's a new country and stuff? How is the best way that any practitioner can actually go about doing that? So to give themselves probably the best chance of, once they're in a position, to succeed as much as they can do.
That's a really good question. I'm going to kind of flip my answer a little bit in that I'm going to say what you've got to do is you've got to show a bit of humility. So what we all want to do when we're approaching people looking for work and looking for employment is to show them how good we are, and possibly inflate a little bit the true strengths that you do have and ignore a little bit the weaknesses that you have. Whereas sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes it's possibly a little bit better just to actually show that bit of humility and say, look, I'm approaching you because, I'm serious about getting into this game. I don't have a huge amount of experience. And okay, experience is experience. Everybody will say, so go to your local club and volunteer and all the rest of it. And I don't think we've got time for that conversation tonight, although I am a proponent of it. But approach these places and say, look, I'm looking to get experience. I may not be this, I may not be that, I may not the other, I may not have this, but I do have this and I do have that. And talk about the qualities and the passion and the drive that you actually have. And if it's somewhere in a foreign country, okay, I'm obviously talk about the fact that you want to embrace the culture, you want to learn, you want to experience living and working in a different culture. I don't know whether it's easy to talk the thing over. And I know when you're in that position where you're the person who's looking for these experiences, that first step on the ladder is so difficult, because there are 1,000 people for every one position that becomes available. But don't wait for positions to become available. You never know. If you approach places, you might be able to create a position or create an opportunity or create, if you're in the fortunate position that you could do, a 2-month internship where they just give you living costs. I don't know, but get that foot through the door. But don't wait, don't look for opportunity. Don't just look in the job section. Create your own opportunities and approach people.
Yeah, perfect.
I was going to say that was one of the biggest things on this webinar that I wanted you to discuss, Chris, because I think it opens people's minds and it gives them, they're not just going to sit back and sit behind laptops and wait for jobs to pop up. Like you say, we need to be building our network. We need to be getting out, speaking to people. Obviously, it's not as easy to get around at the moment, but we can still engage and speak to people and create those opportunities for ourselves. So, Charlie, do you want to go into? We've got some questions that have come in. Should we go into some of the Q&A now?
Yeah, let's do it. So, Stefano's asked, in a lot of job descriptions, you can see S&C coaches expected to do sports science tasks and vice versa as part of their role. What's your opinion on this, and do you think it is helping the field?
So when I and many others started out, and also today, many others who are working in let's call it the performance field within sport. I think it was Bryce Kavanagh used the phrase. I'm sure somebody had used it before, but the idea of a specialist generalist. So somebody who has the capacity to deliver safely and effectively in certain areas, but isn't perhaps an expert in all or sometimes in any of them. That described me when I went in at Middlesbrough. I did the on-field fitness work. I did the gym work. I was hopeless, by the way. Did the gym work with them. I oversaw the nutrition. I organised hotels and travel for pre-season trips. And there's so many roles that you undertake. I actually think it's a dangerous position to put yourself in if you define yourself as, okay, I am a sports scientist and these are the boundaries. I am a strength and conditioning coach and these are the boundaries. Because by definition, that creates division. And actually, this is something that football has suffered from for a long time, is the coming together and the fighting between different disciplines, trying to actually protect their own patch, or wary or concerned about others moving into their patch. We all should have sufficient knowledge of each other's domains to be comfortable that, okay, I am a sports scientist. I'm not a strength and conditioning coach, but I do believe I can deliver safe and effective strength and conditioning. Not as well as a trained strength and accredited strength and conditioning coach, of course not, but I know my limits, I know my boundaries, and I know what's safe and I know what's not. So I would say to Stefano there, no, I don't think it's something that is a negative impact on us. And I think anything that encourages greater interdisciplinarity and people working together to a common goal has got to be a good thing for all of those people in the sort of disparate disciplines.
I suppose with that, sorry, Charlie. I was just going to say, I suppose with that, because the job titles, we hear all sorts of different titles now, don't we, of jobs, and I always try and revert it back to fitness coach, because then it opens up that we can do a number of different tasks. But I'm thinking more about coaches looking at job descriptions and maybe seeing a strength conditioning job or a sports science job. I suppose in a way, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's a case of ignoring the title and looking at maybe the description of the job and some of the key tasks that are going to be required by yourself, and then relating yourself to that role, rather than looking at something like an S&C coach looking at a sports science role and going, that isn't for me, if you get what I mean by that.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously football's a really fluid business. People come and go with regularity, and it used to be just the coaches, but now it's performance staff as well. Coaches, at the end of the day, coach is king. And principally the success or failure of a football team, a football club, to a large extent will be down to the coach. And the coach will look at the staff around him. First and foremost, you imagine, I'm working at a football club, and they might call me a sports scientist. The coach won't care about that. The coach will care about me, who I am, what I do, and how I carry out my duties. So the first thing that a coach will judge you by is what you do and how you do it. What relationship you actually have with the players. What kind of compliance and buy-in you get from the players because of the fact that they might have a bit of trust and respect for you. And if there's coaching staff that he's come in to work with, he'll glean information from them about you. And then after he's worked out whether he's having you, he'll work out whether he's having what you're doing, whether you're a strength and conditioning coach or a sports nutritionist, or whether you're a sports scientist or a rehabilitation coach or a head of performance, or we can go on. You've all read the paper by Martin Boucher and Dave Carolan,
Just on that is quite interesting, because I suppose it comes back to especially your time maybe at Middlesbrough, when the coaches didn't really know about sports science, it was very new to them. Were there times where you got a lot of backlash in terms of what you were trying to implement? And did you then revert back to trying to explain the benefits of this, or trying to build the relationship with the person to then subsequently push your agenda, or what you wanted to sort of implement? Did that occur in any, but maybe at Middlesbrough or any throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, so being pretty candid, pretty open about it. So the time at Middlesbrough was essentially split into two phases. There were three phases. So, and that was built around the coaches that we worked with. The first one was, we had 5 years with Brian Robson as the head coach. So Brian had Viv Anderson and Gordon McQueen as his assistants. Three players who have, you look up the CVs, their playing records are pretty amazing. And so I was imposed on those guys. Now, for the first 6 months, I was in training every day. They put me in training to try me out. So I'm training with Janino and Emerson and subsequently the likes of Gaza and people like that. I still have issues with my right shoulder from a tackle that Danny Mills took me out on. But actually, and this isn't something I recommend, and it's not something that happens nowadays, but my credibility at one level, at the first step, came from the fact that I actually handled myself acceptably well in the training environment. And then, obviously, as part of the team, you spend a lot of time together, pre-season trips, mid-season trips, away trips, Friday nights and what have you, where you're talking. And it's a drip feed, drip, drip, drip. You're not trying to impose anything upon them, and you're trying to calibrate the messages you're giving in order that there's just little chunks that they take. After 5 years, Steve Mclaren came in, And Steve couldn't be any more different to Brian. And to be fair, I mean, there were a couple of members of the support team that Steve brought with him. One of the first things they wanted to do was to get rid of me because they were really unsure of, I'll say this now. I don't think Steve or anybody will mind me saying, they were the answer. They were going to come in and shake up the world, and they had all the answers in there within the 5 people that came in, and they don't need these modern practitioners interfering with it. And it was only when there was one day, so we had a player called Alan Boksic, who was Croatian and had a very Croatian mentality. Alan didn't go on wind the clock back. Pre-season training was 2 sessions a day. We'd train at 10:30 and then we'd train at 2:30 in the afternoon. Alan didn't do that. Alan wanted to sleep in between the 2 and then come back at 6 and do his second session. He didn't want to dip the second session. He wanted to do it at 6. And actually, everything that Alan wanted to do was correct. We look at every physiological and recovery-based theory that we want to talk about. Alan was right. So somebody had to stay back and work with Alan. And obviously that was me. So I spent a lot of time one-on-one with Alan. And Alan was a difficult person to deal with. Steve and Bill Bezic and the other guys that were there with them really struggled. And Alan was a smart guy. And at times he had them on toast. And so I had this one-on-one relationship with Alan for quite some time. And it became apparent to them that actually there was a role for this guy in the place. If only at first it was just to pacify and keep this angry Croatian out of their hair. And don't get me wrong, Alan walked off the training field on one-on-ones with me more often than not. But we had a way of working. And so I kind of survived on a number of levels, but in totally different ways with these people. There were very different cultures. You've got to adapt and you've got to create something that you can offer. The 5 years we had with Steve were amazing. We built a really strong culture. The club went through its most successful period ever, and credit to Steve Gibson for supporting everybody in that time, and credit to Steve Mclaren and his staff because they were amazing days. And I think they coincided with this real acceleration in the adoption of sports science and sports science practice. And I like to think that we had a small part to play in that.
A couple of other questions in the Q&A. So Robert Owens asked, so touching on the accreditation, there are a few companies currently out there such as UKSCA, CSCS, BASES. Do they hold any value as he's seen a very split with coaches at the top level who hold them, or is there greater importance in building relationships with coaches already working in the field?
So there is value in both. I mentioned earlier about the EPPP, and if you look in the EPPP regulations, there is a requirement that to operate as a sports scientist in a Category 1 academy in the UK, you must have or be working towards BASES accreditation. Now, BASES accreditation is about, obviously, kite marking practice as a sports scientist. I would actually promote in the UK that people do pursue that because I think it's worthwhile. And I've got to hold my hand up here. I'm part of the BASES exec committee and was partially responsible for this situation. But I actually think people should also pursue UKSCA accreditation as well, because I think there's a value in them both. And I think it breeds this rounded practitioner that we spoke about earlier. But even if you are somebody who has your degree and your postgraduate degree and you've got BASES accreditation and you've got UKSCA accreditation, you ain't going to survive long in football or any other sport if you don't have the human and the interpersonal skills to build relationships. And the challenge is, I counted up the other day, I've worked with 34 head coaches. Every single one of them is different. And every single one of them is a new relationship. And every single one of them demands a slightly different set of interpersonal skills, or an adjustment, or a recalibration. And you've got to be prepared for that. Yes, you can be you, but you've got to be you on the understanding that you've got to be you in the context of a you that can get on within the system and within the people that matter in the system.
Brilliant. Cool. And then the next question's from Lisa. So, question for Chris: would you always recommend going to university and having a degree for some of the roles you've mentioned? So yeah, there's that question. I suppose if the answer is no, then what are the other routes into it, I suppose?
Yeah, again, it's a really good question. When I was at West Bromwich Albion, every year we took on 2 or 3 junior sports scientists, or what we called interns at the time. And I don't want to get into the conversation about pros and cons of internships. I'm guilty as charged on that one. Every single time we would get 600, 700, 800 applications for these positions. And when you get that number of applications, you've got to have filters. And maybe it's lazy, maybe I was lazy, but it's easy to put objective filters in place. So does this person have a degree? Do they have a postgraduate degree? And do they have experience? Do they have accreditation? Or are they pursuing this? What else have they done? Voluntary work. I think you'll find that most places will probably put academic qualifications as one of their filters. So whether or not you agree with that, I think it's possibly very difficult to sell yourself without academic qualifications if you're still relatively young and you don't have a huge amount of experience. So it's a really difficult situation. But if you think about it in that sense, and I'm guessing that most of my colleagues that have been in similar situations will do exactly that thing. At the end of the day, you've got maybe 2 positions and you've got 800 applications. You've got to filter down to a long list, filter down to a short list objectively, and then try and appoint the right, and I mean this, the right person, not the right qualification, not the right profile, but the right person to the job. But to become that right person, you possibly have to tick a couple of boxes beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think you say it definitely true, is in you got to have the filters with any job, whether it's sports therapy, physiotherapy, or business, and anything. Is you've got a big pool of candidates you have to filter down. So it kind of touches upon your point earlier of what people can do more in terms of contacting them, trying to get experience, and putting yourself out there more, so you don't just limit yourself to what those filters are. So that's good advice. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. One is, what are your favourite or most used monitoring tools, external and internal, and what do you usually use for data analysis and reporting?
My favourite internal monitoring tool is an easy one. It's a conversation. Have a chat with the players. Mm-hmm. Now, it may well be that you have some objective information that prompts that conversation, but for the most part, it'll be a conversation. And it could be a conversation prompted by you or a conversation prompted by the player. On an objective level, for internal monitoring, I'm a huge fan of heart rate data. I know some people find, of course, there are always challenges with heart rate data on a practical level, ensuring you get good quality data. It's worthwhile getting some electrode gel and just dabbing electrode gel on the inside of the conductive pads on the device to increase the chance of getting good quality data every time. And then for that, if you're interested in a measure of the volume of work that's being performed, heart rate exertion every time for me. If you're interested in the intensity of a drill or a session, I like to look at the heart rate exertion that's been accrued above 75% of an individual maximum relative to the total. So you've got a relative value, you've got a percentage value. The more work in the higher zones, the higher the percentage. In terms of external load, it's at the end of the day, it's a budget thing. And not everyone has the budget for GPS technology. So in Nigeria, we are using GPS technology. We're using one of the lower budget GPS technologies out there. And the way that it works is, so obviously I was out there for a week. My major task over there was I was given 2 members of staff who will be the operators. Neither of them have any physical education, sports science training at all. They were employees of the club. So I had to get them operationally sound such that we could get information from players that I can then remotely look at and comment on and remotely mentor these people to gradually get them to understand how this kind of thing works. So, okay, this club in the context of Africa obviously has a bit of money because they've spent about £8,000 on monitoring external load using their GPS technologies. As part of the UEFA share workshops that we run, I have a particular section where we go through zero budget, small budget, and larger budget, 3 potential scenarios. So we're taking into account the likes of Andorra, right through to Turkey and the big money nations. And zero budget is just showing them how you can measure volume and intensity of training by using RPE. It's not difficult, and all you need is a pen and paper. So in that scenario, you work with what you've got. If you've only got heart rate, you can do the same with heart rate as I've explained, and similarly, you can do that with their GPS technologies. It all depends on what resources you're given, but conversation first and foremost.
Yeah.
And is there anything, I think there's maybe a couple of other ones, but is there anything from you want to ask or finish off on?
I think it'd be good just to finish with this one, Chris. So someone's asked, I've just graduated with a sport and exercise science degree. When looking at jobs, whether it's coaching or performance role, they expect years of experience. What is the best way to achieve this experience when you don't know anyone?
So I'm guessing what you say by you don't know anyone is that you don't know anybody in whichever environment you're looking to work. So let's say, for the sake of argument, you're looking to work in football and your target is top 4 tiers of football. You don't know anybody who works in the top 4 tiers of football. Then I guess what you've got to do is you've got to try and find an intermediary. And okay, you've done your qualifications, you've been through your university, you must have links and contacts, not just in academic side, but in the sport performance side within the university. So go back and explore them. You may actually know people who are working in a junior level in performance sport. Perhaps it could be at tier 5 or tier 6. If you can use your friends or your colleagues, you've been through university, you will have friends and colleagues who might have been fortunate enough to get a position in one of these situations. Use them to maybe try and broker that conversation. I'm not pretending it's easy. Of course it isn't, and we hear this all the time. And I have so much sympathy for these people who are clearly, they're very bright. They've got huge enthusiasm and passion for wanting to get into sport. But I think just looking for the direct approach into these organisations, into the clubs and organisations, possibly is going to be less productive than looking for this indirect route, direct route, where you might go through something of an intermediary. Sorry, I can't give a more concrete solution to that. I think so many people have tried to address this kind of question, and as I say, it's such a difficult one to address.
Yeah, perfect. So, yeah, Ben, anything else from yourselves, or obviously there's a few other questions. If there's anything that people want to ask, and get in touch, Chris, you're on social media and everything. Is there, they can contact you on there?
Totally. I'm not as social media active as many. But no, first of all, my email address. So I'm Chris Barnes, chrisbarnes60@gmail.com. I am on Twitter at chrisbarnes60. You're more than welcome to contact me. I've got a LinkedIn profile. I don't do Instagram and those other things because I'd make a picture, and I haven't got the time.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm sure people can contact. We'll put those links in the post comms to everybody anyway, so they can see it. But yeah, that's great from everything from my side. Brilliant. I think people will take away a lot of stuff this evening. Yeah, anything to add there, Ben?
No, I think there's been some great, really valuable discussions there, Chris. So thanks a lot for sharing your experiences. I know there's loads more we could have gone into, and the time absolutely flew by. But yeah, thank you for being so open and sharing all the experiences that you have. I'm sure all the guys that are on it have taken plenty from it. So thank you.
No, thank you, guys. Thanks very much for inviting me on. I know a lot of the talk has been quite superficial, and we haven't dug into any deep science or anything like that. I hope that hasn't disappointed people.
No, not at all.
I'm sure they're all very happy that they found out that Danny Mills injured your shoulder, and I think they'll probably be listening to the stories from there. So cool, brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay. Yeah, we'll send out the recording and everything. But yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for watching.
Cheers, guys. See ya.